Marcus had been briefed on countless customs before setting foot on the Rier, shining trade moon of Veshra, but nothing had prepared him for how quickly one sip of milk could ignite an uproar in the grand chamber of the council. The hall glittered with crystal columns that caught the light of the twin suns and reflected it in dazzling patterns. Delegates from 100 worlds sat in their elevated alcoves watching with the curiosity of predators. In the center, where the ceremonial table stood, a single cup rested on an ornate pedestal. Marcus had thought it was meant for any honored guest. He had lifted it, taken a polite sip, and the sweet, cool taste had lingered on his tongue like honey, mixed with iron. He placed it back without realizing he had broken the most sacred custom of the Vishari royal line. The sharp cry from the dais cut through the murmurs. Princess Lysara, youngest heir of the Vishari throne, her silver skin glinting beneath her jeweled crown, rose to her full height. Her voice echoed with outrage and something Marcus could not name. She pointed at him, her eyes wide, her voice trembling between anger and a strange fear. "Wait, you drank my milk. That makes you my mate on this planet." The chamber erupted into chaos. Council members shouted, translators buzzed, guards shifted uneasily with weapons half-drawn. Marcus felt the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing against him, some filled with disgust, some with cruel amusement, and others with cold calculation. He had walked into a cultural snare that no briefing could have prepared him for. His fellow human envoys stiffened, whispering furiously into hidden communicators. The eldest Vishari counselor rose, his long robes dragging across the floor as he barked about laws older than memory. According to their code, to drink of the milk was to share the bond of lineage, a pledge that was deeper than politics, older than war. It was a bond of blood, of body, of inheritance. Marcus wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but his instincts told him that laughter here could mean war. He bowed stiffly and tried to speak with calm words, explaining that humans had no knowledge of such a ritual, that it had been a misunderstanding. Yet every phrase only seemed to tighten the noose because for the Vishari people, intent did not matter. The act itself carried weight heavier than intent. Lysara's declaration had bound them together in the eyes of her people, and to deny it openly would be an insult that might splinter alliances and invite bloodshed. Lysara herself looked torn, her silver features pale beneath the crown, her fingers clenching and unclenching at her sides. She had not meant to make such a public declaration, but once spoken it could not be recalled. For her people, words uttered before the council carried the strength of law. She glared at Marcus with a mixture of fury and something else, perhaps desperation. He was not just an intruder anymore. He was now her declared mate, a role she could neither rescind nor replace. The chamber's noise swelled as factions began to take sides. Some alien delegates sneered, speaking of human ignorance and weakness, calling for punishment to teach Earth its place. Others saw opportunity in the sudden union, whispering about forging new bloodlines and strengthening ties. Hidden among them were rivals of Lysara's family, their eyes gleaming with the thought of scandal that could topple her claim to succession. Marcus stood rigid, his mind racing. He was a soldier once before becoming a diplomat, and that training told him that survival meant adapting quickly. He studied Lysara's stance, the pride in her shoulders despite her trembling, and he realized she was as trapped as he was. If he fought this bond, both of them would be devoured by the politics of the chamber. But if he leaned into it, if he played along, he might find a path forward. He drew in a slow breath and met her eyes. For the first time, instead of speaking to the crowd, he spoke directly to her. "Then let us understand what this bond means, Princess. If I am to stand beside you, let it be not in shame but in strength." His words silenced part of the chamber. Delegates leaned forward, their expressions sharp with interest. Lysara blinked, startled that he had not rejected her but answered with resolve. For a moment her anger softened and she nodded once, almost imperceptibly. It was enough to set the council into a frenzy of new debate. Marcus knew he had stepped onto a dangerous path. By accepting her words even partially, he had given them ground to bind him to Vishari law. His fate was no longer in his own hands alone. As the chamber continued to roar with arguments and accusations, as guards braced for violence, Marcus understood that the sip of milk had changed everything. He was no longer simply a human envoy negotiating trade routes. He had become a symbol, a mate to an alien princess, a piece on a galactic board where every move would be watched by predators circling for advantage. And deep within, under the weight of shock and calculation. A spark of something unexpected stirred in him, something that whispered this bond might not just be a curse. It could become a weapon or even a bridge, but only if he survived the storm that was now coming. Straight for him, the council chamber did not calm for hours, and even when the meeting ended, the echoes of shouts and mutterings seemed to follow Marcus through the long corridors of the palace. He had been escorted by 2 human envoys and 4 Vishari guards who kept their hands close to their ceremonial blades. Every glance from the aliens in the hall carried either contempt or curiosity, and Marcus could feel the weight of his mistake pressing harder with every step. He thought of the sip of milk and the wide eyes of Princess Lysara, and he knew there was no undoing it now. In the private chambers assigned to him, the human envoys paced in agitation. One, a sharp-spoken diplomat named Cassin, jabbed a finger in his face and demanded to know why he had touched the ritual cup at all. Marcus tried to explain that no one had warned him that the drink was forbidden, but Cassin cursed under his breath, saying the Vishari would never accept ignorance as an excuse. To them, the bond was sacred, and now Earth would be dragged into a conflict that could either shatter its standing or elevate it to dangerous heights. While the humans argued, the palace itself stirred with whispers. Rival houses of the Vishari saw an opening to question Lysara's claim to the throne. They spread rumors that the young princess had planned the entire affair to bind a human warrior to her side. Some spoke of scandal, others of opportunity. To Marcus, it was clear that his life was now a bargaining chip in the power games of a court he barely understood. That night, he was summoned to Lysara's private quarters. The chamber was vast and filled with banners bearing the sigil of her house, a winged beast coiled around a flame. She stood near the window watching the stars beyond the atmosphere. When he entered, she did not turn immediately, but her voice carried the same sharp edge as before. "You should have known what that cup meant. Now the council believes I chose you and I cannot take it back." Marcus replied calmly that he had not sought this bond, but since it had been declared, he intended to treat it with respect. He told her that Earth had no desire for humiliation, but neither would humans bow to insult. His steady tone made her whirl around, eyes flashing in the dim light. "Do you understand what you have become?" she asked. "You are bound to me by law older than empires. My enemies will try to kill you to weaken me, and your people will see you as compromised. You will stand alone in both worlds." He met her gaze without flinching. "Then perhaps we stand together instead, because if I fall, so do you. And if you fall, your enemies will not stop with you. They will come for the humans as well. Better to face them as allies than victims." For a moment, silence stretched between them. The princess studied him as though trying to pierce through his resolve. Then she gave a short, bitter laugh and said that humans were reckless creatures, but sometimes recklessness was exactly what the galaxy feared. She admitted she had never intended to choose a mate so early or so publicly, yet Marcus's act had forced her hand. Now the law was clear, and the council would soon demand a trial of honor to decide if the bond would stand. Marcus asked what the trial involved, and Lysara explained that it was not merely a test of combat but of spirit and truth. He would be judged before the council and before the gods of her people through ordeals meant to expose weakness and dishonor. Few outsiders had ever survived such trials. If he failed, the bond would be broken and Earth would be branded unworthy. If he succeeded, the bond would be sealed beyond question, and he would stand not only as her mate but as a figure of legitimacy in her claim to the throne. The weight of her words settled heavy in Marcus's chest. He had faced battlefields before, but those had been clear-cut struggles against enemies he could see. Here he would fight shadows of law and tradition with no map to guide him. Yet he also saw in her eyes a flicker of something more than anger, a flicker of hope that perhaps this human might endure where others would crumble. When he left her chambers, the corridors were filled, with spies pretending to be servants and nobles whispering behind fans. He ignored them all and walked with steady steps back to his quarters. Cassin and the other envoys awaited him, demanding to know what had passed. Marcus told them only that the trial was coming and that they must prepare. His voice carried a grim resolve that silenced their protests. In the quiet that followed, Marcus looked out at the alien stars of Veshra and understood that his path was no longer his own. The ritual bond tied him to a princess he barely knew in a world on the edge of war. Somewhere deep inside, he felt the soldier in him stir again, ready to face whatever trial the galaxy placed before him. And though doubt pressed at the edges of his mind, a harder truth settled in his heart. If humanity was to earn respect among the stars, it would not be through cautious words alone, but through the kind of courage that no council chamber could ever deny. The days leading up to the trial passed in a blur of whispers and hidden dangers. Marcus found himself shadowed not only by Vishari guards but also by eyes he could not see. The palace was a maze of crystal corridors and towering halls filled with the scent of foreign spices and the soft hum of alien machines. Every step reminded him that he was far from Earth, a stranger bound to laws he barely understood, yet he carried himself with the bearing of a soldier who refused to bend. His calm manner unsettled the watching nobles, who expected panic or desperation from a human caught in their ancient trap. Lysara visited him each morning and evening, sometimes with words sharp as blades, other times with silence heavy as stone. She would lecture him on the meaning of honor in her people's eyes, explaining how every gesture and phrase could be twisted into a weapon against him. Marcus listened patiently, asking questions when he needed, never showing fear. Slowly, he began to notice how her voice changed when they were alone, compared to when others were near. In private, there was less anger, more worry, perhaps even a faint respect. She confessed one night that the ritual of milk was never meant for outsiders, and that her people feared what it might mean to bind a human. The council saw danger in what humans represented, a fire that refused to be controlled. It was during one of these conversations that the attack came. A shadow slipped past the guards in the form of a cloaked assassin from one of the rival houses. Marcus caught the glint of a blade in the dim light and reacted with the instincts drilled into him during years of combat. He pulled Lysara aside as the blade cut the air where her chest had been. The guards were too slow, but Marcus was not. He grabbed a metal staff from a wall mount and used it as a weapon, clashing against the assassin with strength and precision that startled even the princess. The fight was brutal. The assassin trained in alien styles Marcus had never seen, but the human adapted quickly, turning mistakes into openings. With a final blow, he disarmed the attacker and pinned him to the floor, forcing him to reveal his allegiance. The guards dragged the assassin away, and Lysara looked at Marcus with eyes wide, not just with shock, but with something else, something more complicated. She admitted that had he not been present, she might have been killed, and by saving her, he had done more to prove his worth than any ceremony ever could. Still, she warned him that the council would not care about heroics. They would twist the attack into another reason to question the bond, perhaps even claim that Marcus had staged it. He answered simply that truth did not fear lies and that he would face whatever came. The incident spread quickly across the palace, and the whispers changed in tone. Some spoke of the human as reckless but strong, others of destiny and omens. For the first time, Marcus saw respect in the eyes of a few guards. That night he sat alone thinking of Earth, of the people who had sent him here to build alliances through words. Instead, he was shaping alliances through blood and survival. He wondered if the council realized that humans were not creatures of ceremony, but of resilience. That to challenge one was to wake a force that refused to break. On the eve of the trial, Lysara came to him again, her voice softer than ever. She told him that once he stepped into the chamber, the council would set tasks designed to humiliate him. They would ask riddles of law, demand feats of skill, perhaps even force combat. He could not rely on strength alone. He must show them the human spirit, that strange combination of courage and defiance that even her people struggled to understand. She asked him if he feared what was coming. He looked at her and answered that fear was natural but surrender was a choice, and that he would never choose it. For a long moment she stared at him, and for the first time she smiled without bitterness. When dawn came, the palace bells rang, calling every noble and envoy to the great chamber. The council seats were filled, their robes shimmering like rivers of color. Marcus stood at the center unarmed, a lone figure under the gaze of countless eyes. Lysara took her place on the dais, regal and unyielding, though her hands trembled in her lap. The trial was about to begin, and all of Veshra leaned forward to see whether the human would crumble or rise. Marcus straightened his shoulders, steady and calm, and waited for the first challenge, knowing that the fate of Earth and the honor of a princess now rested on his ability to endure the storm. The chamber was a sea of voices hushed as the council elder rose with his staff of authority and struck it once against the polished floor. The sound carried like a crack of thunder, silencing the crowd. He declared that the trial of honor would now commence, and that all present would bear witness to the truth of the bond between Princess Lysara and the human who had taken the sacred milk. His words were laced with disdain, but also with the heavy weight of tradition that even he could not escape. Marcus stood at the center of the hall, his back straight, his gaze steady though his heart pounded like a drum in his chest. The first trial was one of words. The elder demanded Marcus recite the lineage of the Vishari royal house stretching back 1,000 years. The test was designed to humiliate him, for no human could know the endless branches of names and deeds. Marcus did not falter. Instead, he spoke of Earth's own long history of leaders, warriors, and dreamers. He spoke with passion, not precision, describing how humanity had risen from a small, fragile world to touch the stars. He spoke of mistakes made and lessons learned, of courage found in desperation, and victories forged in unity. At first the council scoffed, but as his voice carried through the chamber, the jeers gave way to silence. The elder scowled, yet could not deny that the human had answered not with ignorance, but with truth. The trial was passed not by repeating their lineage, but by showing he carried one of his own. The second trial was of skill. From the shadows, 2 warriors entered, clad in ceremonial armor, their weapons gleaming with energy. Marcus was handed a simple blade and ordered to defend himself. The duel began with a clash that shook the air. The warriors moved with alien grace, striking in patterns unfamiliar to human combat. Marcus relied on instincts honed through battle years ago, adapting each move as it came. He was struck once across the shoulder, yet he turned the pain into momentum, driving one opponent back. The second warrior came fast, but Marcus disarmed him with a maneuver born of sheer improvisation. The duel ended with Marcus standing bloodied but unbowed, both opponents at his mercy. Instead of delivering a final blow, he lowered his blade and bowed to them. The act of mercy rippled through the chamber like a shock wave, for it showed strength not in dominance but in restraint. The third trial was of truth. The elder demanded Marcus swear before the gods of Veshra that his bond to Lysera was not a trick of politics nor a scheme of earth. A great flame burned at the center of the hall, said to consume those who lied. Marcus stepped forward and placed his hand near the fire, feeling its searing heat. He declared that he had not sought the bond, yet he would not reject it, for in the moment of crisis, he had chosen to honor the word of the princess rather than his own pride. He spoke of survival, of shared struggle, of the assassin he had fought beside her chamber. He vowed that whether mate, ally, or prisoner, he would face what came without deceit. The flame flared high, yet did not consume him. The council murmured in astonishment, for the fire itself seemed to have accepted his words. When the trials ended, the elder called for judgment. Factions within the council argued fiercely, some claiming the human had cheated, others declaring that the gods themselves had marked his truth. Lysera stood then, her voice ringing clear. She proclaimed that Marcus had faced every challenge with courage and had proven not only his worth but the worth of humanity. She warned the council that to deny the bond now would be to deny the will of their own laws. The chamber erupted again, but this time the tide had shifted. Many eyes that once gleamed with contempt now carried the flicker of respect. Marcus felt the weight lift slightly from his chest, though he knew this was only the beginning. Outside, the palace fleets were gathering in the darkness of space rival houses, preparing for open conflict. The council might have accepted the outcome of the trial, but enemies were already moving to strike before the bond could solidify into true power. As Marcus and Lysera left the chamber side by side, he caught her whisper, "You surprised them all. You even surprised me." He answered with a faint smile that battles were never won in a single day and that the storm was still coming. The air of Veshra changed after the trial, as if the very stars above leaned closer to see what would come next. Marcus walked the halls no longer as a prisoner to custom, but as one who had endured their sacred tests and lived. Some guards who once eyed him with suspicion now offered subtle nods of respect, yet whispers carried darker notes. Because the rival houses had not been defeated only. Embarrassed, and embarrassment in such a court often turned to bloodshed. Princess Lysera held counsel in her private chambers, surrounded by advisors, both loyal and doubtful. Marcus stood beside her, not as a silent guest, but as one whose voice could no longer be ignored. He spoke of the gathering fleets that orbited just beyond the trade lanes. Scouts reported that warships of the rival house prepared to strike under the guise of punishing dishonor. Lysera's advisors urged caution, speaking of negotiation and delay, but Marcus shook his head and told them that hesitation would invite ruin. He explained in plain words that humans had survived countless wars, not by waiting for mercy, but by preparing for the blow before it fell. Some of the nobles sneered at his bluntness, yet Lysera silenced them with a single gesture. She had seen his strength, and she had felt his resolve in the trials, and though pride kept her voice steady, her eyes betrayed a spark of trust. She commanded that Marcus be given access to the training grounds, and that he share the methods of human soldiers with her warriors. Many scoffed at first, believing that one human could teach nothing to seasoned Vishari fighters. That belief shattered within the first hour. Marcus trained them not in the elegant flourishes of ceremonial combat, but in the brutal efficiency of survival. He showed them how to fight in pairs, how to watch one another's blind spots, how to turn terrain into advantage. He drilled them until sweat streaked their polished armor, and their pride was forced to bow to results. They learned that humans did not fight for show, they fought to win, and they fought to live. Some resisted, but others began to understand that this raw adaptability was the true weapon of Earth. Meanwhile, Lysara moved among the nobles, weaving words with the same precision Marcus used with a blade. She pressed them into unity, reminding them that without strength, the council would collapse and their enemies would feast on the ruins. Rumors swirled that she was becoming more than a princess, that she was shaping herself into a leader worth following. Still, danger crept close. Assassins made attempts on Marcus's life, and each failure only proved how desperate the rival houses had become. One night, while Marcus and a small band of loyal guards patrolled the outer gardens, a squad of mercenaries struck with silent weapons that glowed with strange energy. The battle that followed was short but vicious. Marcus fought with the fury of a man who refused to be cornered, and his human instincts once again turned the tide. When the last mercenary fell, the guards looked at him with eyes that now held no doubt. They had seen a human fight not for ceremony but for survival and victory. The next morning, the council convened in secret to debate whether Lysara and Marcus should be protected or surrendered. Spies carried fragments of the conversation to Lysara's ears. Some claimed Marcus was a danger to tradition. Others argued that the bond had already saved the princess from death and brought strength to their forces. The rival house pushed hardest for condemnation, even as their fleets crept closer to the system. The galaxy beyond Veshra was watching with keen eyes, for if the council betrayed the bond, it would send a message that alliances with humans were worthless, but if they honored it, they risked giving humanity a foothold in the highest circles of power. Marcus understood the weight of it all, but he did not shrink. He met Lysara in her chambers that evening and told her plainly that war was inevitable. He could see it in the movements of fleets and in the desperate actions of their enemies. He urged her to prepare the people for what was coming. She looked at him long and hard, then nodded slowly. She said that if he was truly her maiden, the eyes of her people, then they would face the storm, together not as princess and outsider, but as a bond forged in trial. As night fell, the great bells of Veshra rang, a signal of warning not heard for generations. Across the planet, warriors prepared their arms and families lit the flames of protection in their homes. Marcus stood upon the balcony with Lysara, watching the skies as shadows of enemy ships glimmered on the horizon. The trial had proven his worth, but now the true test would begin, not of words or rituals, but of war. The first streaks of alien fire lit the sky as the fleets of the rival houses descended upon Veshra without warning or mercy. Marcus stood beside Lysara on the palace battlements, feeling the rumble of engines beneath his feet and the pulse of distant weapons fire through the air. The council had faltered in its preparation, but Marcus had spent countless hours training the defenders, molding them into a force that could move faster and strike harder than their enemies expected. The humans had learned long ago that victory came not from numbers but from cunning and coordination, and Marcus now brought that lesson to an alien world where honor had blinded many to survival. The first wave hit the outer defense. Rings and explosions tore through the crystal towers, scattering shards like falling stars. Marcus moved swiftly through the ranks of soldiers, shouting commands and guiding them into formations that maximized their strengths and minimized casualties. He had studied the alien ships and knew that while their weapons were devastating, they relied on predictable patterns. Using that knowledge, he led small squads to intercept boarding parties, turning what should have been slaughter into a series of deadly traps. Lysara watched from the command dais, issuing orders of her own, but it was clear that her confidence in Marcus had grown into reliance. She sent envoys to coordinate the planetary shields and artillery, synchronizing their strikes with Marcus's maneuvers on the ground. And for the first time, Veshra's defenders fought not as isolated houses, but as a single, adaptive force. As the battle intensified, Marcus noticed a squadron of enemy ships attempting a covert landing near the palace gates. Without hesitation, He grabbed a hoverboard and launched himself into the night sky, weaving between laser fire as he propelled toward the intruders. Lysara had tried to insist he stay safe, but Marcus knew that leaders were made in moments of action, not fear. He landed amidst the attackers and engaged them with a combination of martial skill and raw human improvisation. His movements were unpredictable, his strikes precise, and his determination absolute. The alien soldiers had trained for years for such encounters, yet they faltered against a force they could neither anticipate nor control. Back at the palace, Lysara coordinated reinforcements and ensured that wounded soldiers were evacuated, while supplies were redistributed. The people of Veshra had begun to understand the human concept of adaptability, of reacting not with rigid ritual, but with quick thinking and courage. Marcus's presence inspired them, showing that even an outsider could bring strength greater than tradition. The battle raged for hours, with Marcus and Lysara moving seamlessly between the front lines and command centers, their bond growing not only in ceremony, but in the shared struggle of life and death. At one critical moment, a massive energy cannon aimed directly at the palace gates threatened to destroy everything. Marcus calculated quickly, recognizing the trajectory and the timing, and led a daring squadron to intercept the cannon's power source. The humans called it reckless, the Vishari called it insane, but Marcus called it necessary. Using a combination of explosive charges and precise strikes, he disabled the cannon moments before it could fire. The relief was palpable but fleeting, for the enemy adapted and intensified their assault, sensing that the human was the key to their opponent's resistance. Night turned into day, and yet the battle showed no sign of ending. Marcus fought tirelessly alongside Lysara, their movements in perfect synchrony. Each engagement revealed more about the enemy's weaknesses and their own growing strengths. Soldiers who had doubted the human now followed his commands without hesitation. Lysara, once bound by strict protocol and hierarchy, moved freely and decisively, her confidence amplified by the trust she placed in him. The city burned in places, yet hope burned brighter, for the defenders realized that they were part of something greater than themselves, a bond forged between human and princess, a force that could not be easily broken. As the sun rose blood-red over the horizon, the last of the enemy squadrons retreated, their ships limping and broken, leaving a battered but unbeaten Veshra in the hands of its defenders. Marcus stood among the soldiers, his armor scorched and hands blistered, yet his spirit unyielding. Lysara approached and placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice quiet but full of weight. She told him that he had not only survived the trials of law and combat, but had now survived the trial of war itself. The council would never again question his bond, and the people would look upon humanity with a new understanding, perhaps even awe. Marcus looked out over the city, knowing that the victory was only a step, and that the universe would continue to test both humans and aliens alike. He knew the storm was far from over, but for the first time he felt that he had earned a place not just beside a princess, but in the heart of a world that had once dismissed him as an outsider. And in that moment, the bond between human and Vishari became unbreakable, forged not in ceremony but in fire, blood, and unyielding courage. The aftermath of battle left Veshra scarred but alive, and the people emerged from their shelters to witness a city that had been tested by fire and survived. Marcus walked through the streets with Lysara at his side, observing the faces of those who had once doubted him. There was awe in their eyes and a quiet respect that needed no words. Children peeked from behind walls, marveling at the human who had stood against the invaders and turned the tide, and warriors nodded as they passed, silently acknowledging that the outsider had become their protector. Yet even in the glow of victory, Marcus and Lysara both knew that peace was fragile, and enemies still lurked beyond the horizon. The council gathered again in the central hall, but this time the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The elders who had once debated Marcus's worth now sought his counsel openly. Rivals who had whispered of betrayal now approached with cautious reverence, offering allegiance and requesting guidance. Lysara addressed the council with a voice steady and commanding, declaring that the bond between herself and Marcus was recognized by tradition, law, and the will of the people, and that any attempt to challenge it would be met with the full force of the planetary defense. The chambers, once echoing with dissent, now pulsed with an uneasy but necessary unity. and the galaxy had begun to understand that humans could not be controlled through fear or dismissal. Despite the temporary calm, scouts brought troubling news from the borders of Veshra's system. Fleets of mercenaries and rival houses were regrouping, larger and more determined than before. Marcus knew that a single victory would never secure the safety of the planet. Preparation and foresight would be required to ensure that Veshra would survive future conflicts. He convened with Lysara and the most trusted commanders, mapping out defensive strategies, pre-positioning forces, and training rapid response squads in tactics that combined human ingenuity with Veshari technology. Every detail was scrutinized, from supply lines to communication channels, and every decision was made with the weight of the planet's survival pressing on them. As the days passed, the bond between Marcus and Lysara grew stronger, not just in duty but in understanding. He learned the nuances of her people, their fears, their traditions, their strengths and weaknesses, and she, in turn, discovered the depths of human resilience and adaptability. They trained together, strategized together, and in quiet moments shared fragments of hope, laughter, and a connection that transcended the laws of planets and bloodlines. The people began to see this partnership as something greater than politics or duty. It was a living example of courage, unity, and the promise of a new era. Then came the message from the rival houses. A challenge for open engagement on neutral territory. A declaration that they would not wait for Veshra to recover, but sought to test the human and the princess directly. Marcus and Lysara met in the palace's observation tower, looking out over the star-streaked expanse of space. He spoke plainly that this would not be a conventional battle. It would be a test of strategy, courage, and willpower that could decide the fate of the planet. Lysara nodded, her eyes unwavering, and together they plotted a response that would surprise their enemies and leverage every advantage they had gained through the trials, the battle, and the unbreakable bond they now shared. The day of confrontation arrived, and fleets from across the sector gathered in the void like predators circling prey. Marcus, at the helm of the flagship, coordinated strikes with a precision that combined human ingenuity with Veshari firepower. Lysara, commanding from the bridge beside him, directed her people with a clarity born of trust and courage. The enemy underestimated them, expecting to exploit divisions and old rivalries, but they found only unity, adaptability, and unrelenting determination. Waves of attackers were met with counter-maneuvers that seemed impossible, and every attempt to break their formation was met with ingenuity and ferocity that shocked even seasoned commanders. By the time the engagement ended, the rival houses had suffered devastating losses. Fleets retreated, morale shattered, and whispers of fear spread throughout the galaxy as news of the human and Veshari partnership reached distant worlds. Marcus and Lysara stood together on the flagship deck, looking out over the aftermath, the debris of enemy ships glittering like fallen stars. Lysara placed her hand on his, her voice quiet but filled with certainty. She said that the galaxy would never forget the day humanity proved its worth, not through conquest, but through courage, honor, and unwavering resolve. Marcus, exhausted, yet unbowed, replied that they had survived the trials together and that whatever challenges awaited, they would face them side by side. In the weeks that followed, Veshra rebuilt stronger than before. The council recognized Marcus as more than a protector. He had become a symbol of resilience and the embodiment of humanity's potential. Lysara ruled not as a princess constrained by tradition, but as a leader empowered by trust, courage, and the alliance she had forged with a human who had arrived by chance and remained by choice. Across the stars, tales spread of the human who drank the sacred milk, who faced trials of law, combat, and war, and who emerged not as a conqueror, but as a mate, a partner, and a legend. And as Marcus and Lysara looked toward the endless expanse of space, they knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, full of challenges and wonders, but together they would face it all. They had survived the trials, endured the war, and forged a bond that could not be broken. Humanity had claimed its place in the stars, and Veshra had claimed a protector who would never falter. The story of their courage and unity would be told for generations, a testament to the unyielding spirit of those who refused to bow to fear or doubt. The galaxy fell silent for a moment, as the realization of what had happened on Veshra spread. From system to system, from one end of the star charts to the other, the news traveled faster than light itself. That a human had not only survived the trials of alien law and custom, but had turned a planet's defenders into an unstoppable force, and stood side by side with a princess whose people had once doubted him. The streets of Veshra buzzed with life, as citizens celebrated a victory that was as much about survival as it was about the proof that humanity could not be underestimated. Children laughed in the debris-strewn plazas, daring each other to jump over fallen shards of alien crystal soldiers, shared stories of how a single human had led them through impossible battles, showing them that courage and quick thinking could turn the tide against overwhelming odds. Marcus walked among them, his armor scorched and his hands blistered, yet his posture calm and unyielding. His eyes met Lysara's as she emerged from the palace gates, her robes flowing and her presence commanding. And serene together they were a living legend, a symbol of the unity between species and the unstoppable potential of humanity. The council had convened once more in the Great Hall, its chambers lined with holographic displays of battles and strategies, showing every victory and setback. Yet this time their tone was different. No longer were there whispers of doubt or challenges to authority. Now the council sought guidance from Marcus and Lysara, listening intently as strategies were laid out and contingency plans devised. It became clear that the human was no mere outsider. He was a teacher, a strategist, and a protector, whose insight into both alien behavior and human adaptability made him indispensable. Lysara spoke with pride and authority, declaring that the bond forged in battle and law was recognized across the planet, and that any who dared oppose it would face consequences that the galaxy would remember for centuries. Scouts returned with reports of distant fleets retreating and systems reconsidering their alliances. The ripple effect of Marcus's actions spread fear and respect simultaneously. Alien empires reconsidered their underestimate of humans, realizing that cunning determination and a refusal to be subjugated were traits that could not be countered by brute force alone. Yet Marcus did not take pride in the destruction of others. He took pride in survival, in the courage of those who fought beside him, and in the trust that Lysara had placed in him. There, connection had grown deeper than ceremony, stronger than law, and more profound than words could capture. They trained together, shared stories of home and distant worlds, and planned for the future, knowing that peace was fragile, but their resolve unbreakable. The princess and her human walked to the highest spire of Veshra, looking out at the horizon where stars stretched endlessly and planets shimmered like jewels in the dark expanse. They spoke not of war, but of hope, of rebuilding, and of the new era that their bond had begun. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange there was understanding that together they had changed. The fate of a planet had rewritten what it meant to be human in the eyes of the galaxy, and had created a legend that would echo through time. They descended to the city below, where celebrations continued, and the people of Veshra danced, laughed, and sang, honoring both their resilience and the courage of those who led them. Night fell, and the fires of celebration illuminated the skyline, casting long shadows across the streets and towers. The human and the princess stood on the balcony above the crowds, feeling the pulse of a world that had survived the storm and emerged stronger than ever. Marcus reflected. On the journey from stranger to protector, from outsider to mate, from fighter to legend, Lysara beside him knew that together they had not only survived trials of tradition and war, but had forged a future that no one could take away, and that the galaxy would never forget. The stars above twinkled as if in approval, and the winds carried the faint echoes of a promise unspoken, yet understood. Humanity had earned its place, not by conquest but by courage, by cunning, by the refusal to surrender, and the bond between human and princess would stand as a beacon across worlds, a reminder that the smallest actions could shift the balance of power, that unity and trust could overcome fear and doubt, and that legends were born in moments of daring that defied expectation. And so the galaxy would remember the day a human drank the sacred milk, a human stood beside a princess, and a world rose victorious through courage, determination, and unbreakable bond. The end.